Hey, everybody. Welcome to a new episode of the Hope for the Soul podcast. I'm really excited about this episode. We recorded this back in early June with some of my good friends, Murry and Garrett Ray. They together pastor a church, lead a church in Bridge City, Texas. Brother Ray is an incredible man of God, a great friend to my father and I, and our families are friends. And so I'm excited for you to hear this. We talk about generational leadership, the role of technology, specifically podcasting and social media, and the modern apostolic church. We talk about Brother Ray, how he is leading a legacy church. He has taken over. He's now the senior pastor of a church and following an incredible man, Brother John Harrell, Elder John Harrell, an incredible preacher, a preacher of preachers. He's a pastor to pastors. And so we talk a little bit about what that looks like for Brother Ray as he steps into that role there in Bridge City. The Rays also have their own podcast entitled A Time to Speak. It's a great podcast. I listen to it. I love it. They offer great insights, and it's just, I would encourage you to go and subscribe to their podcast. And also, I would love for you to take a few seconds and rate and review Hope for the Soul. I really, really think this season is going to be our best season yet. We talked a little bit about that last week, but we have, in a couple weeks, Wayne Huntley is going to be on an episode with us. The first 5 minutes of that episode, when we sat down, the first 5 minutes of that conversation was unbelievable. My mind was blown. And then we went off the notes and we dove in and just followed the cloud. It was a lot of fun. Episode 8 of this season, that's going to be on October 6th is when that's going to air. That's going to be an episode just for children. So if you listen to podcasts when you're taking kids to school, that's going to be a lot of fun. But I've rambled enough now. Now let's dive into our conversation with Pastor Murry Ray and his son Garrett. I really hope you enjoy this. Stick around. It's a little long, 55 minutes, but I promise you it'll be worth your time. Thanks again for listening to Hope for the Soul podcast. All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome to this episode of the Hope for the Soul podcast. I am joined today by a father-son duo, a pastor duo, Pastor Murry Ray and his son Garrett. And we're so glad to have y'all. Welcome to Hope for the Soul.
Thank you. We're honored to be here today. Yeah.
So it's good to be here and without worries of edits later.
Hey, there you go.
Yeah. We're gonna make this real difficult for you, so you have to edit a lot of stuff.
There you go. Say all the bad things.
Yeah,
right.
I'm gonna have to be like, gonna cut this, and we're gonna cut that.
Can we start over?
And
hey, we've done that so many times. Yesterday, I'm bad about at the office. I'll leave. We record to a hard drive, and I'll leave the hard drive in the main office while we're across the in the other office, and we'll sit down and start, and Alex will be like, we don't have the hard drive, so I have to get up and run and get it. Yesterday I got here to sit down and record Brother Story first thing in the morning, and I walked in the door and I was like, I don't have the hard drive, so I had to run back to the hotel. So bad. So even though our setup doesn't require too much in post, I still
it never fails. We'll have everything set up. We'll have a guest on our podcast, and I'll get there an hour early. Everything's ready to go. Everything's working, and then the moment that the person walks through the door, nothing works. And so, but it looks like we're good luck. Everything going all right here. So.
You know, for my part, I never make mistakes on our podcast.
You just come in.
Yeah, that's
You're
right.
the star of the show.
That's it. I'm smooth as butter. Just
that's great. So speaking of podcasts, y'all host a podcast, and it is called A Time to Speak.
Yes.
And I discovered that a few months ago or probably close to a year ago now, on your Instagram. And so I'm a listener. I'm a fan.
Awesome.
I love it. Yeah. I was listening a few weeks ago to the episode where y'all redid the intro like 4 or 5 times because you kept on saying today.
Yes. Yeah.
That was so good.
Terrible.
I was laughing because we've done that so many times. And
and we talked about just editing all of that out, but I was like, I feel like sometimes it's so serious, Let's just throw a little humor out there and let them know that we're not robots.
Exactly.
So
talk to me about A Time to Speak. What is that? What's the purpose behind it? Why did it start? I'm a fan, but I want our listeners to become y'all's listeners.
Well, we appreciate that. Well, Garrett started hammering me couple of years ago about doing a podcast, and I'm like, here's my problem. I'm at that stage in my life where I'm just old enough to be young, and or young enough to be old. I don't know. I'm like above the beneath and beneath the above. I'm somewhere in the middle, Yeah. So I'm like, a podcast, who wants to listen to me talk? Or us banter back and forth for 45 minutes, And so I just kind of put it off. And then we had a conversation. Jeremy Hart was with us, and I think he was dabbling in a little bit, and he was encouraging us to get started. And then we just had this conversation about it. And so one night, I think at a Dairy Queen, we were just kind of kicking.
All good things start at Dairy Queen.
Yes, that's right. We were just sort of, brainstorming about, well, what would we call it, and we were coming up with all kind of names. And really, I just kind of threw out there, Solomon said, to everything, there's a time to speak and a time to, be silent. So that just kind of resonated with all of us at the table, and it just stuck.
Mm-hmm. Plus, you can't have that voice and not have a podcast.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
So I was talking to Paul. So part of my R&D for this episode was Paul Price.
Oh,
and
Lord.
I texted him a few days ago. I was like, hey, man, I'm interviewing the Rays. I said, I know him from a distance. You've got a good relationship. That's how I met you last year, was through Paul. Mm-hmm. And he said, okay, if you don't ask about the voice, like that's where you have to start. They both have good voices.
Oh, well, I think that comes from my grandpa, Ray. Mm-hmm. He had a little bit of a gravelly voice. He was a very unassuming man, but I think that's where I inherited it from. And then, unfortunately, you passed it to Garrett. The problem with this voice is that it sounds like either I just woke up or I have a cold, one of the two. So I guess that's good for radio.
It's good for radio, and it's great for preaching. It's great for it's soothing.
Yes.
So back to a time to speak. Uh-huh. So is this for your church, and then obviously other people listen, but is that kind of who you record for, or
you can?
Yeah, we we sort of push everything on all of our church accounts, and so.
We feel like they don't have a choice; they have to listen to.
Right, we have them captive there, and so if they don't listen to their pastor, then it's kind of a a bad thing. But it's open to anybody to listen to. But we typically tend to, I don't know if it's on purpose or not, but we typically tend to sort of direct things at towards our church. But I feel like we've done quite a few things that have been necessarily not with our church in mind, and so it's
right. We've done some episodes with like directed at young ministers and the process of waiting, for doors to open and that kind of thing. So we try to hit a broad range of subjects, and we've had guests on, Nick Mahaney, Jeremy Hart. We've got this coming up season. We're going to do some interviews with professionals in Pentecost. So we have a couple of business people in our church and career professionals, medical field people. Wow. So we just want to kind of get a perspective from them. We have a district attorney in our church, and so great. We want to bring him in and just say, hey, how do you balance your career and the choices you have to make in business or in the legal profession or the medical profession with your faith.
Oh, that's great.
And so we're really looking forward to that. We have, I don't know, right now, probably 4 or 5 at least kind of on the top of our heads that we're going to be, shooting for.
That's something that we enjoy having guests on. We don't have as much guest on throughout the year as I would like. We do occasionally,
right?
But this is kind of where we come and we'll stock up, and then these will air in the fall. So through August, September, October, we're going to spread out the episodes that we recorded here
awesome.
This week. But I think a lot of people ask me, like, hey, I listen to the podcast. I'm thinking about starting one. Should I start one? And my answer is yes. Like, whoever it is, no matter what, just start it, because you don't know if it's going to stick or not.
Right,
and we kind of started the same way. Like, pre-COVID, we knew that we needed to start live streaming our services, but we didn't. And then March is when we were buying our equipment, March of 2020, and then everything happened. So it was just like,
Oh, well.
A perfect storm, but yet also perfect timing. And then from that, I realized, obviously through COVID, everybody's online numbers was massive, you know. Some was the 3-second, but some was the 30-minute on YouTube, you know.
Right. Yeah.
And so we capitalized on that. But then I realized there's a lot of people who's not going to come into our services in person. They're also not going to listen or watch a service online, but they'll listen to a podcast,
Right.
which is basically it's the same content, but it's in conversational format.
Right.
So that's where we started, and I love it. Like podcasting is, to me, I do it. I don't care how many people listen, and thankfully people do listen.
Right.
But
Yeah.
it's something just for our church to hear. My dad and I, and Alex is on a lot of episodes. My wife is on almost every episode. And
Oh,
she's
really?
super funny. She opens every episode with a joke. And
Now she's seen now, right?
yes.
Because she used to be the invisible
Yes,
voice back
yes.
there. Yeah.
So this is it's this table. Most of the time I'm where y'all are. My wife
Right.
is over there, and then Dad's here. And if Alex is on the episode, she's here, or sometimes she's over at the switcher. So
She's really the one we came to meet. We wanted to get her
I know.
autograph.
And when we walked in and it was just you, I was like, what's going
Oh,
on
yeah.
here?
I know.
We
I've
just
let
got
you down. Me or Dad or Kayla. Let's scratch.
At least
the whole
Alex is
thing.
here, so
Yeah, there you go.
that saves the day. But
There's some sweetness here.
Exactly.
But what's
You
cool
know,
about the podcast thing is that in Bridge City, you know, as Dad said yesterday, the huge area, you know, cityscape of Bridge City, but it's almost 9,000 people there, and inevitably we'll get on a conversation of something that had happened, you know, in our area, and so there just happens to be a Chicken Express in Bridge City, and the manager there is the sweetest thing ever. She's just just the best, and
Because that's sweet tea.
Yeah,
that's right. That's right. But so I told a story, and it was of her. The AC went down apparently in their kitchen, and it looked terrible in there. And so I come to the drive-through, and I'm picking up, you know, the real Lord's chicken. And
Especially now.
and we'll cut that out, edit that out.
No, we're leaving it. You said it, Garrett.
But I have to say that, you know. And but so I talked about how this lady was just super kind. It was obviously hot in there, and they were all, you know, in a bind, and she was just all smiles and cutting up and laughing. She was as sweet as can be. So we talked about her in that podcast for just, you know, 5 minutes. Well, next time I went to the drive-thru, I told her, I was like, we talked about you in our podcast, and she's like, what podcast is it? And so I showed it to her, and it's just cool how a podcast can be the entryway for people, you know. And so she said she went and listened to it, and
awesome.
And so it was, you know, a voice from our church to Bridge City. So
You know, one of the things that sort of was the motivator for me for a time to speak, especially that term, was that there's so many people talking these days.
A lot of noise.
So many voices. You know, the Bible says there are many voices, and none of them is insignificant. They affect somebody somewhere. And I really kind of felt a little bit convicted that I would choose to remain silent in a time when somebody needs to speak. And I'm not saying that I have the answers for the world. That's not the point. The point is that the more of us like you that are doing these podcasts, the more that voice gets out there, because it is literally one of the most popular avenues of communication today. And it blew I'm not a podcast guy, so I didn't know, you know, how popular they are. When I had people in the church tell me that they listen to 2 or 3 a week, you know, faithfully. And I'm like, really? You just drive down the road and listen to some random people talk?
It's the new talk radio.
It is. And it's
especially after Rush is gone.
Yeah, I know. And so that for me, that was the motivation to just not get my voice out there, but another voice.
Right.
And, you know, Garrett always has a lot of insight, and he helps keep me on track. And then having guests come in, and we try to listen to, you know, family members and people and conversations that we have that sort of spur us on to do
I
more
think
episodes.
Between preaching and podcast, I have running notes in my phone, ideas, and I'm always writing down. Like if I see something in culture,
Right.
if I see something just out around town and it sparks something, oh, this could be a thought, Alex is good. We have a running note with our planned episodes, and she updates them. We can all update those on our phones. But yeah, I think Brother Ray, it's so important. It's like what you preached yesterday. I sent you kind of like my outline of what I talked about until last night when I was laying in bed. I was listening to your sermon because I couldn't be in there yesterday.
Okay.
Awaken, O Zion. Unbelievable.
Yeah.
I think, and you touched on this some in a different way, but we have to push back against the darkness.
Right. Yeah.
And I think I want to talk about that sermon for a few minutes because I was fired up last night, and then I woke up and I'm like, I'm ready to preach. I'm not ready to podcast. I'm ready to go to my city and let's take authority.
I'm glad it didn't make you want to quit.
Well, listening to you preach makes me want to preach, but it also makes me want to quit.
No.
You have perfected not just the calling, but the craft. It's unbelievable.
You're very kind. Thank you.
But I think it's time that Zion awake. And could you talk a little bit about what you preached yesterday?
Yeah. You know, when Zion awakes, the Lord just sort of randomly dropped that. You know, none of us are original, and I wouldn't take credit for coming up with a title 99% of the time. And I was just reading through some old books. My library is full of old stuff, and
I told him that he needs to do a library tour of yours. Yeah. I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, it's fine. And so I was thumbing through a 100-year-old book because for me, the older the better. You know, those old preachers, denominational preachers, they were students of the Word. They may not have had all the truth or revelation, but they were students of the Word. And so I, as many of my mentors have taught me over the years, the gold is in the old, you know, and so I was just flipping through, and I never had seen really that contrast before, and so I saw it, and then just began to develop it from the title and the text. For me, it really resonated because I think we are so much in the habit of waiting on God to do something. Isaiah 51. The cry from the people is for the Lord to arise, for God to awake and strengthen his arm as in the days of old. And then the next chapter, you know, God starts speaking. Well, if you're going to wake God up, you better get ready.
That's right.
And I know that we understand that he doesn't sleep, but I'm just, you know, as an allegory. But if you're going to stir God up, then get ready for him to stir you up, because that's what he does. He turns around and flips the tables. And by Isaiah 52, he's saying, no, you wake up. I've been awake the whole time. So it's time for the church to wake up and recognize that I can't stir the world and convict sinners and send them to a sleeping church. And, you know, as we often do, we get so, it's like Laodicea, you know, we get rich and increase with goods, and we're just comfortable with our crowd and everything's going great, and and we sort of lose our hunger, our passion. You know, your wife's a great cook. You kind of tend to start taking that for granted until you have to go eat my cooking. And then you'll say, honey, we're never doing that again. You know, and we get so comfortable with our everything that we sort of don't need God, and we just kind of we drift into our own state of slumber. And then when something happens and the world itself is, you know, just out of control these days, and we're waiting on God to arise, and he's saying, I put you there to make a difference in your city. I put you there to make a difference in your world. So I will work, but not without you. And we're in tandem with him in kingdom work. And one of the things I love about that sermon is when we talk about the parable of the kingdom and how that it shows how God orchestrated the growth of the church. It's supposed to be an uninterrupted increase. And it's not just that we grow in number and conversions, but we're growing spiritually. We're growing in the word. We're growing in worship. We're growing in truth every day. That's uninterrupted increase. It's the blade, then the ear, then the full corn in the ear, you know, but it grows uninterrupted. And I think that a lot of times I'm guilty of it. I think we're all guilty of it. We just kind of stagnate. We just kind of go dormant, and because we're comfortable. And then all of a sudden something happens and we're starting this cultivating process again. So without preaching the whole sermon again, that's kind of the crux of it, is that when Zion awakes, then God starts turning the tables on the adversary. His people have been drinking this cup of gall, as it were, bitterness, trouble, trial, captivity, and he calls them to wake up. And then when they wake up, he says, now I'm going to take the cup you've been drinking out of your hand and put it in your enemy's hand. I'm going to restore these things to you. And so when Zion awakes, it brings restoration, it brings revival, it brings growth. And, we have to stir up the gift of God that's in us. He gave us power. He gave us the keys to bind, to loose, to limit, to loose, whatever. And really, we forget that, I think. And especially in this modern day when we do have so much. We have to return to a hunger for the things of God.
That's right. I think I wrote down a couple quotes late last night and this morning. He said, we have power over our cities. And I think it's so important. That's just a blanket statement until you realize that city council has a level of authority to make decisions over Bridge City or over Conroe.
Right.
The mayor has an authority in which he operates in, and we fall under subjection to that. We want to be good citizens and obey the laws of the land.
Right.
But we also have the authority through prayer to really unleash some things that the enemy has bound in our cities, and in the life of people who sit on our pews, but also the lives of people who are driving past our church that want to come but haven't worked up the courage to.
Right.
And I think that your message yesterday was not just a message, but it was a call, an awakening in the spirit, where you address things in the spirit. And I think more as a young preacher, and I'm sure, Garrett, you're the same, is I don't want to just preach a message, but I want to address the spirit of the day and the spirit of the age. And from a young preacher that likes preaching like that, I just want to thank you, because not only did you address the spirit of the day, not only did you awake preachers and saints, and I love, just pet peeve at camp meeting, I love that you looked forward and not over to the right or over to the left. Like you were addressing not just the preachers. You referenced the Sunday school teachers, and probably a lot of that was because you had church people there, and you were probably not just ministering to the camp meeting, but you were doing some pastoring to Bridge City as well in that moment. But I just want to say thank you from my perspective, and I know we're not supposed to do this, but we do it. Message of the camp meeting, at least for me, is what I needed to hear thus far.
Well, thank you.
And I know Garrett's going to say that too, because he's like me. We're going to cheer our dads on, and we're our dad's biggest fans. So, Garrett, what do you do at Bridge City United Pentecostal Church?
I probably get in the way more than anything.
So humble.
Well, I don't know. We do a lot, and we're blessed for sure. And so, whatever we can pick up and do with our hands, we try to, Alexis and I, and it's a great church, and they're a great people, and so we certainly try to do what we can. If that be to edit a podcast or two, or that be to, sweep some floors, or if that be to preach a sermon or two, then that's what we're there to do, and so we just try to help out where we can.
He's fixing to be one of those people that interrupts the preaching because he's got a new baby on the way in 3 weeks.
That's what I was about to say.
There will be a lot of going in and out.
Baby girl, right?
So basically, I change diapers in church is where we're going with
You're
that.
about to learn some things, my friend.
He is, exactly.
So that's what I do.
Well, he's being humble about it. He does all of our marketing, all of our social media, the graphic design on our signs, our new church logo. He's not going to probably talk about all of that, but
he's looking down right now.
yeah, and but it's okay, for you to share that. I lean on him for a lot of things that people, when people are and how it is as a pastor's son, sometimes it's tough. We don't have to go into the whole PK thing. We can do that at another time.
That would be a good episode.
Yes, it would. But I think God's just gifted him, so he's involved in our music department. We have, and I think it's fair to say this, we have a number of men in our church and people in our church, as every church does, a volunteer staff. They work full-time jobs, and then they come in and they do their church job,
hours and hours,
and they're dedicated to it, and they fill those gaps. And without them, a church cannot survive. I think sometimes those people sell themselves way too short. They don't understand how valuable they are to the kingdom. But the fact remains that somebody has to be there on call 24/7 other than the pastor or a church secretary. And in this day and age, with podcasts, with social media, live streaming, we've got all these technologies that we didn't. I had a songbook when I was a song leader. Personally, I'd be fine if we were still singing, the old gospel ship.
A lot less work.
A lot less work. And just preach and then go home and whatever. But we live in a day that is technologically driven, and so there are a lot of little things through the day. Sometimes I call him. I'm like, hey, that sign out there is stuck. It's just beeping or just blinking. And he has to go up there and change that. It's something I can't wait for somebody to get off of work. So, you have to have those people there 24/7 that can do those things. And if your church is going to get out there and get any recognition, you have to have that social media presence. So, Garrett has a gift for all that. And it's stuff he was starting to do when we were in Arkansas. It's just grown into a little bit more here because of where we are and the demands. I mean, let's face it, all of our churches are competing with the church down the road. And, we have to be on our toes these days. So
we can't afford to have an off day.
Yeah.
Obviously, in the spirit realm, we can't have an off service because lives are at stake. But because of the digital age that we live in, I mean, it's unbelievable.
Yeah.
The majority, probably over 90%, maybe even close to 95, 98, 99% of our guests don't come because they drove past us, because we're not on a major street in our city. We get very little traffic. They come off of our online presence, our Instagram. And so it's changed the game, for me, since I've been on staff the last 15 years. The world has changed so much. And that's why we're having to reallocate resources to prioritize that, because we have to meet people where they are. A few years ago, we did a radio ad. I think it was for Easter. I forget what it was. It wasn't even on a Christian station. I went to the country station. I mean, I just spent a bunch of money on it, and not one person came, or at least on the Connect card, not one person put they came because they heard us on the radio ad.
Oh, wow.
And we were already on social at that time. Obviously, it wasn't a driving force like how we view it, have to use it now. But that was the moment that we're like, okay. The radio is great and everybody listens to it, but it's not where you reach people and catch people. So,
right.
Well,
it really is a ministry, Garrett.
Well, it's one of those things to where if we were to go out and try to hang door hangers again, number one, we'd have to pay for all those door hangers, and now you can click send ad, and the last one we did, we just did like the little 10-mile diameter, draw the circle out, and, drop a pin, and that reached like 12,000 people, and that was a clip of him preaching, and I think
pennies on the dollar of a door hanger.
Exactly.
And and so I would rather. Well, actually, I guess I would rather just take him around to every door and just let him preach for 30 seconds. And
this is going to be the 2023 version of Billy Sunday.
Door hangers are out, 30-second clips. Open the door, we'll click play, he'll preach, then we'll leave. And but essentially that's what's happening. So now you can send that ad, and they are hearing the word of God preached, even if they skip it after 5 seconds, which I'm sure that most maybe do.
But it's now in their algorithm though too.
Right. So that's a word that was being implanted in a 10-mile radius. And whenever in our time have we been able to do that like now? And so that's it is an outreach, and I think that eventually inevitably we must see the the harvest in it.
So you mentioned Arkansas. So you were born and raised in Texas, Brother Ray.
Yes.
And then ministry took you out of the great nation of Texas.
Yes, it did.
As Brother Macy likes to say, the great nation.
Great nation.
And then God brought you back a few years ago, and you're at Bridge City Church, where I guess your family grew up. You were born and raised, essentially.
Yeah.
And you're following probably one of the most prolific preachers of our lifetime.
Yes, indeed.
And but very few people know.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody knows, but a lot of our generation doesn't know. I wouldn't if I wasn't a pastor's kid.
Yeah.
The incredible man that Brother Harold was and is.
Yes.
So could you speak a little bit about what it's like to lead a legacy church and then follow a man like that, and how you honor that legacy, but also cast vision and high hope for the future?
Sure. Well, it's terrifying, for one, and it's very daunting. But Brother Harold is an iconic preacher whose generation recognized him as a thinker on a different level. He's still that way. He's 81, I believe, now, and he still thinks on a different level. Someone asked me one time, he said, man, how does he come up with that stuff? Well, number one, he's a reader, and he's a praying man, first and foremost. But God has given him a gift to think on a whole different plane than most of us. And I remember one time as a young preacher, I hadn't even gone full time yet. I was just feeling the call of God, and he preached one night, and it was powerful. And I went to him at church. I said, "Oh, Pastor, that was incredible." And he said, "I was just fooling around."
Okay.
And
did that make you sick?
Yeah,
I just played with him.
I said, if I can ever fool around half as good as you, I'll have it made. So, excuse me, he put into me, without so much setting me down and saying, do this, do that, by his example, by his method, and he's very methodical in what he does and how he preaches and delivers the word. Some people are like a Harrier jet. They read their text and then they shoot and they're gone. He's more like a cargo carrier. He's lumbered down the runway, and then he takes off, and you're going to get to heights you didn't know you were going to reach, and then he'll land the plane gently most of the time. And so to follow him, I told him, in fact, I asked him if he would leave me a pair of his shoes so I could just put them up on the pulpit and say, look, I'll stand in them, but nobody's going to fill them. Some people even tried, in their concern for me, tried to warn me of the dangers of following an icon like that, a paraclete, really, in many ways. And, that most of the time a guy gets chewed up and spit out, and he lasts a few years and he's done. Well, my answer to that was, I appreciate the encouragement.
Thanks for believing in me.
Yeah, really. Thank you. I know that I'm not qualified, but I have been chosen.
Yeah,
so
that's right.
But, for me, it's because I feel like he and I are so close and have been over the years, that it was, and Bridge City has never gotten out of my heart, even though I pastored another church for 22 years and gave it everything I had and love it to this day. The people there, I have no regrets. I would go back and do it all over again. But this is where I know that God ultimately wanted me to be. And for all of the involvement that I had in Arkansas, I was on just about every committee they had. I served on the youth committee. I was youth secretary for 5 years, Sunday school director for 12, secretary of that for a year. I've been involved there. It was hard to walk away from the Arkansas district. They're great men, and it's a great district. In fact, I was so glad to see Brother Gaddy the other night. He's one of my dearest friends in the world. And but coming home to pastor that church was somewhat easy because I'd been back so much. So it felt natural. It's what the people wanted, and it's what he wanted. So it wasn't like was forced on anybody. It was just years in the making. And by the way, those years were also very frustrating for me.
I bet.
Because there was a lot of, we're going, we're not. It's like trying to watch a space shuttle launch. Okay, we're ready for takeoff, and then there's a little hiccup, and we're not. So it was a constant back and forth, but God helped us through all that. So just to cut to the chase, to follow him has been an incredible challenge, but he has been completely amazing. It would be great if he were still in Bridge City, but that's just not who he is. He's not going to be there and be in the way. He wouldn't be in the way, but that's the way he would think. And right at COVID, he did for me probably what I think is the greatest thing he's done for me the whole time. Because we talk a lot, and I was concerned about shutting the church down. You know, you got those people, bless God,
we're not, it's a tough time.
We're not doing that. It's not we're not going to be told what to do, and they're not shutting our doors. And on one hand, I felt like it was prudent. On the other hand, I felt like it was caving in too.
Yeah.
But
we all felt that.
Yeah.
Pull.
Yeah. And I asked Brother Harold, we were talking one day, and he said, well, what are you going to do? I said, I don't know, Brother Harold. I said, I just don't know. He said, well, I know this. You can't worry about what I think.
Goodness.
You can't worry about what I would do, because he told me, he said, honestly, I don't know what I'd do, but this I know, you're the man and you'll make the right decisions. God put you there for this season, and it just released me to become the pastor, and everything I do, I measure it by what he's still my pastor. That's the beautiful thing about it. He may not technically be everybody in Bridge City's pastor anymore, but we all know whose church it is.
But through you,
you know
his
what
influence and voice still
exactly.
speaks.
And he still talks to them. They still talk to him. Our people go visit him.
Oh, it's so special.
And that's the way I want it.
Yes.
I'm not threatened by that. He's not trying to hurt me. He's not undermining anything I do. I know that if somebody went to him and complained, he'd say, hey, you go back home and you submit to your pastor. That's just who Brother Harold is. So, they've had to settle for less than a little bit less, not a whole lot less.
So this is where Garrett gets it from. This
preaching
is where the humility comes from.
So they, but it's been great. And, he and Sister Harold are amazing people, and we were blessed for 48 years to have them in Bridge City. Their family, Daryl and Johnette, their grandkids are, their son-in-law, daughter-in-law, they're all amazing people. We love them. They're really, I tell people I'm kind of the third Harold kid that nobody ever saw because they kept me in the closet, until
the time was right.
and then they brought me out. I was like, okay, you're stuck with this one now. So yeah, it's been easy, as easy as it could be for me. It's been a little over 4 years now. We've been through a lot. I mean, deaths, COVID.
Oh my goodness.
A hurricane tore a church up. Then I had a massive heart attack last year.
That was okay. So that was a year ago.
That was a little over April the 5th was a year ago.
Wow. I remember Garrett posted on Instagram that your first round of golf back was that Arizona. Where was that at? Yeah. And did we play golf right before or right after that?
It was before that. It was before that a little bit, I think.
Okay. Yeah.
And but we get out there and he hasn't swung a golf club in a year, and I'm thinking to myself, if I've never beat him, so I'm thinking to myself,
this is my chance.
Yes, he has 3 stints. Yes, he hasn't swung a golf club in a year.
He's got a defibrillator.
Yes, but we get through the front, and I managed to play terribly, and I shot, I think, something like 7 over. He was 6, so he's only up by 1 going on that back 9. So I'm thinking to myself, so you're telling me there's a chance. and so then I think that he realized that, I was thinking to myself, you're telling me there's a chance. He then proceeds to shoot 1 under on the back.
Oh, my goodness.
And I proceeded to play the same.
Yeah.
And so, life isn't fair and favor isn't fair. And so that's how
Isn't it crazy?
goes.
Like,
It's hard work and dedication, man. That's what that boils down to.
I'll be 36 this year, and I still can't outwork my dad. Like, I can beat my dad on the golf course now, but neither one of us are that great. But I can't outwork my dad. Like, I think he knows I'm getting close to it, But like he's just like, okay, I've got a few more good years left, so I'm just going to up the ante. And which I love that. Yeah. I'm grateful for that. Yeah. There's a lot of guys in my position who are in the middle of a pastoral transition that's like, hurry up and let's get it over so we can run. And I'm like, it's going to be cool to be the guy, but when I'm the guy, I still want him to be the guy. Right. You know? Right. It's really cool.
And that only solidifies who you are as a man. Yeah. You know, forget the preaching thing.
That's right.
All of us can develop the craft. It's application. Yeah. It's like anything. Golf swing, carpentry, it's all application. Understanding the principles of it, patterning yourself after the best of the best, and reaching for that. And there are some people that don't understand that, and they will be critical and bitter for the rest of their ministry because they don't understand that abilities can be developed. No, we're not all going to preach like Wayne Huntley. You know, we're not all, none of us are going to preach like Johnny Harrell. Yeah. None of us are going to be Kent Smith. But we can be the best version of ourselves.
That's right.
Patterned after those men that we can be. And then be content, be satisfied with that. You know, if I try to put anything in my guys and in Garrett, my son-in-law Ryan, who's a tremendous preacher and communicator himself, the young men in our church, the older guys in our church that have been ministers for a long time that fill in and help and preach out occasionally. Look, God didn't create you guys alike.
That's right.
But there's nothing wrong with patterning yourself after someone who is good at what they do. Yeah. I mean, when I learned to play golf, I learned by watching Jack Nicklaus.
Oh yeah, the best.
I learned by watching the pros. You think I want to learn from some guy that couldn't break 100?
Yeah, that's right.
That's who I am. If I'm going to do anything, I want to give it the best I can give it. So, you know, I think that in ministry, you have to just. I'm probably getting off track here, but
good. I just realized you were going 44 minutes too.
Oh well,
I said half an hour. Time flies when you're having fun.
It does. So you know, I think in ministry, be who God called you to be, and incorporate the best into who you are, and it just everything can be developed down the course of time. I apologize. I feel like I got way off the tracks there.
No. And I'll add something to that too very quickly, is that my generation, I think, has the issue of trying to be solely themselves. But how does a young man I'll use, you know, myself and guys that are around my age in their early 20s even begin to identify as themselves? Who is themselves?
Still finding yourself,
you know, and who are we without great men in our lives? And there is no man that endeavors in great things and then succeeds if he is without great men in his life. And there is no man that makes himself, nor does he build himself then to be turned out great, but it's only because of the hand of great men in his life. And I think that's one of the things that my generation needs to learn, is that it won't be because your hand was great. It'll be because you had great hands in your life.
That's so good. I think looking back, where I was talking to somebody this week, and they said, I'm trying to remember who it was. Anyway, they said, you know, you're not the young preacher anymore. And I was like, yeah, I am.
Yeah, exactly.
What are you talking about? I'm still the young preacher. Yeah. And like, no, you're like the middle. And Garrett, you're the young preacher. And I know we're the same generation, but just because 20s and 30s kind of, there's a differentiation there. But I remember, Garrett, when I was in your position, I was on staff full-time for 7 years before I ever preached a sermon in the main sanctuary. And I remember being so mad. I was mad at my dad, which was the dumbest thing. Like, now that's why he didn't let me, because there was something in my spirit that wasn't ready for that. Yeah. And I remember being so frustrated. And there was a lot of things going on in our family and our church at that point. And so it was tough on many levels. But looking back, I think I'm glad that I let the hands form me and shape me.
Yeah.
And obviously Dad's hands are still on me, and there's other great men's hands who are still on me that I'm still. Yesterday I was texting Brother Mace. He's real close to me. He's a real big mentor in my life.
He's a great man.
And I love Brother Ron Macy. And there's men like that I think if they're around when I'm 50, I still want them shaping me then.
Oh yeah.
And I think, Garrett, you're so right. Sometimes we just want to run and be us, but we're never going to be us. We have to be who God calls us and desires us to be.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of pressure, and I want to be careful because I'm not the one to probably be having this conversation, but on a public format. Privately, I could tell you exactly what I think. But I think there's such a push for young preachers to be engaged in the prophetic that we're really running the risk of sensationalism.
Yes, we are.
And there can't be a surplus of that. And there goes any chance of me ever preaching at a school of the prophets. But
That's so good.
I'm sorry. But, it scares me.
Yeah.
Because we are begotten by the word.
Yes, we are.
We are saved by the preaching of the word. Paul said to Timothy, preach the word. He also encouraged us not to let any man despise our youth. Just because a guy's young doesn't mean that he is either unqualified or qualified. You know what I'm saying? It's like you're at the place you're supposed to be at. And don't let anybody push you into one vein. Does that resonate?
Yes,
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I mean, you can edit it out if you want to. I wouldn't be offended. But, my generation, I'm only 54. Mm-hmm. So, I shouldn't be having these heart issues that I had. Now I'm doing great, but it made me mad that it happened to me because I've worked hard to take care of myself, but it's part of my DNA, and I have to accept that.
Wow.
And I have to live with that. There are going to be things about your ministry that you don't like, things about your ability or the way your voice, whatever, that you don't like. But you're going to have to learn to live with that because that's part of your spiritual DNA. And all you can do is trust the cardiologist in your life who's saying, it's going to be all right. Just go do what you want to do. Do what you can and be all right with what you can't do. And I'm telling you, you can ask Garrett. My grandpa he was an old Cajun, and he was a John Wayne of his day. And I love that man unfathomably. He just was amazing to me. He used to tell me all the time, I'm the bull of the woods, and that's the way I felt all my whole life. I felt like I could walk through it, climb over it, tear it down, build it back again. And I'm having to learn now that, okay, you can drive me to Lufkin, but it's part of my heritage. Mm-hmm. So I'm just going to embrace where I am and embrace who I am and take care of myself and develop what I have. Yeah. So, in your ministry, there are going to be things you don't like. There'll be things you're never going to be comfortable with. Pacemakers are for old people. I'm still hitting off the blue tees, and I'll go to the tips if you want to. But accepted. I just I've had to learn that it's okay, and that's the mental battle in life and in ministry. If you can win that, gird up the loins of your mind, play the man, and be who God called you to be.
One last thing in closing. Mm-hmm. I've almost everybody that's been on the past couple of days, I've asked this question, and it's R&D for a sermon that I'm about to preach. Uh-huh. I preached this past week a sermon, Why Your Family Needs the Church. Mm-hmm. Part 2 of that is the not so inclusive, not so desirable thing that our flesh wants to hear, and it's why your family needs a pastor. And it's I'm having to prepare my spirit for it because I can't preach that in a way that comes across that you need me. Right. It's not the man, it's the office. But you just said something that's reminded me that I needed to ask this question. You said you're having to trust the doctor.
Yeah.
And there's something in our life that sometimes we have to trust people that we think don't know us because it's my body right now in culture, my body, my choice. I'm not going to listen to anybody. It's what I want.
Right.
It's your body and your choice, but you're having to listen to that cardiologist because you've got those stents and that defibrillator and that pacemaker, and he knows more about why your body's doing it than you do.
Yeah.
And so can you speak a little bit from that perspective of why society needs a pastor right now?
Well, it's we live in a day where everything is self-diagnosed. The worst thing I've found that I can do is research anything, especially when it comes to my health. Why is my foot hurting? Well, there's 10,000 different reasons out there. Maybe you dropped something on it,
No, but if you look up online, you're leaving with cancer.
Or you've got cancer. You either stubbed it on the coffee table or you're dying.
That's right.
So write your will out. And, this whole my body, my choice crowd, they don't know their liver from their lung, They have,
that's staying too.
Where's your medical degree?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? People need a pastor because, let's face it, most people are not in the Word.
Yeah.
And the life that we have been called to live is only directed in the Word. And so they need direction. They need a pastor because if he's the man he's supposed to be, then he's watching for their soul. And as a shepherd, you don't just leave your sheep to the wolves. I need somebody who's looking out for me. I told my pastor one time, if you ever see me fall, pick me up and set me in the right direction. Because without his guidance in my life, I would have made mistakes that would have been irrevocable, irreversible, and probably irreparable. Did he always say it in a way that was kind and compassionate? Absolutely not. Sometimes it was pretty stern. Like, what are you thinking? I'm like, well, apparently I wasn't. But I'm thinking now, so tell me. We need a pastor because he cares. He's an under shepherd. So that means that he is the closest thing to an angel. When the angels of the church are mentioned in Revelation, we all know that that's the pastor. He's the closest thing to an angel in flesh that we're gonna see. And therefore, he's the closest thing to God in the flesh that we're going to see.
Wow.
Now, I don't mean to be arrogant in that. I'm just saying that he's he's an ambassador of ambassadors. He is the voice of the voice, and we have to value that. Look, no, not every pastor's perfect. He's a man. One of my favorite Spurgeon sayings of all time. People often credit me with it in my circle, but it's a Spurgeon, quote, the best of men are men at best. And we're all men. We all are subject to the same temptations. Yes, we all put our pants on the same way, one leg at a time and all that stuff, but there is a distinction in that office. And we are to reverence that because God set that up. If it was up to me, it would be an angel or it would be God himself. But he set it up for men. This ministry, the Bible says, it's not for angels. He gave this ministry of reconciliation to men. And the number one reason we need a pastor in our life is because that's God's gift to us to benefit our lives. Sometimes I buy a toy for my grandbaby just because I want to. I didn't ask his parents for permissions.
Get ready, Garrett. You don't know this frustration yet, but it's coming.
It's coming. I buy them the loudest thing I can get them because I know they're going to take it to their house.
Yeah.
But then sometimes I buy them something because they need it. And God gave us this gift of pastoral ministry because he knew we needed it.
Wow.
And that's why he said in one place, he said, I will give you pastors after my own heart. And we have to learn to just, we don't have to go to him and ask him, is it okay if I buy a new car? It's not what he's there for. He's there for the stuff that matters. And I thank God for the men in my life, my pastor, Brother Harold, for, my whole life. I've also sat under a few other pastors, and I've got mentors in my life. And I, as a pastor, thank God for that. If anybody's listening and they're just kind of wondering, well, what do I need a preacher for? Well, you know what? You don't need a preacher. You need a pastor.
It's a big difference.
And if all he is your preacher, then you got problems, And I know that the term's been thrown around a lot, that it means the same to a lot of people. But the fact is, you need to see him as your pastor.
That's right.
So
and this world is so absolutely afraid of criticism. And the reason is because of this cancel culture that we live in. And so to quickly answer just from this perspective, the reason that we need pastors is because it is the gift of God that allows us to make a mistake, and instead of being canceled, we are cultivated. Mm-hmm. Instead of being canceled, we're corrected. And it is only the man of God in your life that can look at you at your worst state and pick you up and love you and care for you and redirect you. And yet it is the world that will kick you when you're down. Mm-hmm. And you need a pastor because you have not experienced a love outside of God as that of a pastor that can look at you and pick you back up and redirect you again.
I think it's crazy that the people who scream inclusivity the loudest are the harshest of critics, and will be the first to throw you out if your version of inclusivity isn't theirs.
And people think that the church does not allow the mistakes, and yet we're the only ones that welcome it. People think that we're out, kicking people when they're down and casting them into the abyss of hell whenever they make a mistake, and yet it's the world that is doing that. We're not canceling anybody; they are. Yeah. We say welcome all.
Yeah, that's right. And they need to go read the Old Testament story about the shepherd and the lamb, and how the shepherd oftentimes would break the leg of the lamb. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's a pastor. Sometimes that's his job. Yeah. He needs to break our leg. Yeah. But then what he does.
That is the intro to the sermon, by the way.
Yeah, there you go.
Not because you said it was already the intro, but.
Yeah. Because that same pastor, when you wander too far, is going to go pull you out of the mouth of the lion. Yeah. And if all he gets is a piece of a leg or a piece of an ear, he's going to bring it back. And he's going to show it. And he's going to say, I fought to the last piece of flesh for this person. The unfortunate thing in the story is that shepherd can't bring that lamb back, but God can. Mm. And many times that's all pastors have to show God is a piece of an ear or a piece of a leg.
I tried.
I tried.
I did everything that you gave me to do.
This was it. And this is all I got. But God knows how to restore that. So you need a pastor because he's going to take whatever's left, bring it back to God so that there's always hope.
Wow.
Yeah, he loves you so much he'll fight the lion just to try to save your ear.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's unbelievable. Yeah. Hey, we've gone an hour.
I'm sorry.
No.
Take everything I said and cut that out.
No, it's probably not a complete hour because our banter at the front end, but I want to thank y'all. We need to do this again with Dad because we might go an hour and a half.
We'll go 2 hours. Come to Bridge City too.
Yeah, maybe y'all come see us.
Hey, I'm down. I'm down.
On our podcast.
Yeah, this is incredible, and that PK subject might be something that we can throw around in the future as well.
I think people probably need to hear your perspectives of it, because if you're like he is, he hears things that he never tells me, and he has to filter that and deal with that in his own spirit. And you probably do too. That your dad, you just don't throw it on your dad, you know. And people think you probably run to him and tell him everything, and you don't. No. So that would be a good conversation for you guys.
There we go, Garrett. We will obey the elder.
Hey, I am the elder.
At 54.
That's right.
Hey, one last thing in closing. Why don't you tell where people can find your podcast and Instagram, Facebook, whatever. Let's do that. So.
Sure. Well, anywhere you listen to podcasts, we're there, and so it's just a Time to Speak podcast. Wherever you might listen to your podcast at, and we're on YouTube. It's on our church account, so Brute City United Pentecostal Church. We say BCUPC around home. Just our YouTube channel there. Our podcasts are there.
Awesome. Thanks everybody for listening. Most of the time I have to say I hope this episode was a blessing, but I know this episode was a blessing. Yeah. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next week right here on Hope for the Soul.